Genesis is a clan known for stealing clan mechanics, and they already stole Tachikaze's equip gauge, but now with the latest Regalia support, they also are stealing Gear Chronicles and Angel Feather's Thunder. Let's talk about these new Regalias.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update. Yesterday we already went over the new big reveals for Vanguard Overdress with the new Overdress mechanic, and in that video I also explained that we have some new Genesis Regalia units as well as Pale Moon Nightmare dolls. And today we're going to dive into these new Genesis Regalia units as they bring something interesting to the table, because in the previous support wave for Genesis, when we got Vanguard as well as the new Astro Poet, we also got the first Regalia cards in the likes of Norn and Yggdrasil, which, interesting enough, worked with the Divine Gauge mechanic that already the Artemis engine founded all the way back at the very first support wave for Genesis at the start of the V-Series. So let's take a look at these new Regalia units, which are going to build upon that which those cards already established, and let's see how far they can take this strategy. And first off, we're going to take a look at the new grade 1, which is Oblation Regalia Var, and her abilities are Auto Rigid Circle. When it attacks or boosts, you may put a card from your soul face down as the Divine Gauge for this unit. So this is free gauge creation, and this is a trend that we're going to see with the rest of the Regalia units in this support wave, and that's a great thing because previously we had Norn and CEO Yggdrasil that mainly created gauges, but they use Counterblast, and that is a limited resource, so having free gauge generation is pretty nice. Now, the more important thing here is her second effect, which is Act on Rigid Circle. Once a turn, cost, discard a Divine Gauge from this unit, soul charge free, then if you have a Vanguard with Regalia in his card name, cost, retire this unit, and counter charge 1. So, in a generic sense, she is basically a soul charge engine that can create free soul every single turn. The only issue here is that she's a bit slow because you first need to call her down, then attack or boost with it, it creates a gauge, and next turn when we can activate the act ability, we can unequip that gauge and then create free soul. Which is really good because we need soul to keep supplying gauges because we are creating those gauges from the soul. So if we don't have soul, we cannot create any more gauges. So this skill in itself is really nice. But if you only rely on her to do this, it's kind of slow. But luckily, within the whole gauge archetype, there are easy ways to give her a gauge forcefully and then immediately use it the same turn you call her to the field. Good example are, of course, Norn and Yggdrasil that can just give a unit an equip gauge. So you can give it to her, use her skill, generate more soul, and you can go from there. But in the Regalia archetype, you can also use her as a countercharger, and that's really nice in combination with Norn and Yggdrasil, because those are the cards that are going to counterblast you for your resources. Even the new support that we're going to look at won't use counterblast, so this card allows us to refund the cost for Norn and Yggdrasil. And as I just explained, you can use those cards to give this card to Gauge, and then immediately use her effect and then potentially refund the counterblast you did. So either you can keep her onto the field in the early game to just generate some gauges and put up some pressure, and then later in the game you can retire her without wasting any counterblast in the first place, or you can just activate Norn and Yggdrasil and immediately refund their counterblast cost to generate gauges on this unit to maybe generate more soul if you're lacking in the soul department. So it's a very nice flexible unit, and in premium can even be much better because there are probably even more interactions that you can utilize with the Regalia archetype, as in premium you have way more cards to your disposal that can fulfill the Regalia condition for this effect. So I think Var is a really nice grade 1 that synergizes with the Divine Gauge mechanic and synergizes really nicely with the Regalia archetype as well. So pretty sweet. But then we get to a grade 2, which rubs me a bit the wrong way as a Gear Chronicle player, because here we have Demon Exorcism Regalia Thrud. And to understand why I said that, let's take a look at her skills. Her first skill is Auto Rigid Circle. When placed, you may put a card from your soul face down as a Divine Gauge for this unit. So very similar to the grade 1 that we just discussed, that it can create a gauge for free when it enters the field. Only the grade 1 needs attack or boost, so the grade 1 is a bit slower than this one. But then let's take a look at her second effect, which is Auto Rigid Circle. At the end of the battle it attacked or boosted cost, This unit has one or more divine gauges, move all of them to another rearguard, put this unit into your soul, and draw a card. This is effectively a divine gauge version of Steam Mechanic Naboo. Because you pay the cost, in Naboo's case, bind a card from a drop zone, and here is moving his gauge to another unit, which in both cases are a beneficial effect to the respective deck, because Gear Chronicle at the time when Naboo came out wanted to bind cards for their bind acceleration, and in this case, you want to put your gauges to your other units so you can activate their skills like Yggdrasil, Norn, maybe one of your Artemis, more important the grade 2 Artemis to give it more power buffs, or the grade 1 if you want to use her skill even more for some reason, if you don't resolve her on boost skill, don't know why you want to do that, but besides that, it is still beneficial, but then both those cards would go into the soul and draw a card. But in this case, Thrud is way more beneficial to the archetype than Naboo now is going to be for Gear Chronicle. So it's kind of annoying because there's way more synergistic interactions with the Divine Gauge application of this grade 2 than just the bind application of Naboo that was in Gear Chronicle, as seen as the whole deck has been moving away from the bind playstyle. So yeah, this is basically a Naboo for Regalia with Divine Gauge. Overall, this is a really good card because, as I explained, you can synergize with the grade 2 Artemis, thus giving that unit a passive 10k power buff, making that thing stronger and more annoying to remove for your opponent. But at the same time, you can use this to reload a Norn, so you can keep restanding your units, or maybe an Yggdrasil or any other unit you want to give a gauge so they're immune or protected by Yggdrasil. Or our new card, because now we're getting into the territory of the new grade 3, so let's talk about that new grade 3. Because the new grade 3 for Regalias is Regalia of Wisdom Angelica. And Angelica's has a couple of skills. Her first skill is Continuous Vanguard Circle. All of your rearguards with Divine Gauge cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effects and gets power plus 5k. So this is a field protection. And this basically makes the grade 3 Artemis obsolete. Because it has the same effect where it protects your field and it gives a passive 5k power to every unit. And I think Artemis also gives a 5k power buff, or only to herself, I'm not precisely sure. The only upside that Artemis then has is that it could give the trigger power to all units with an equipped gauge. But as we're going to see with Angelica is a bit more versatile with her other skills. Now, on the contrary, this protection is a little bit different than Yggdrasil, because Angelica just states that your opponents cannot be chosen by card effects. While if Yggdrasil is your Vanguard, they cannot be interacted with the ability. So Yggdrasil's protection is still a bit better, because Angelica doesn't protect against indiscriminate field removal like something like a Blade Master. They still die of Blade Master. Yggdrasil protects your units against a Blade Master field nuke. So keep that in mind. But overall, I think you want to keep Angelica as your Vanguard and Yggdrasil as your rearguard for the plays that you can do. Now, for Angelica's second effect, with Auto and Vanguard Circle, when it attacks, choose up to 2 of your rearguards and put up to 1 card from your soul face down as a Divine Gauge for each of those units. So again, free gauge creations. And this works really nicely with everything that we just discussed, but more importantly, the Artemis cards, the grade 1 and the grade 2, and as again, more importantly, the grade 2, because you can keep pumping that unit turn after turn after turn with all your support cards. But this is also a really nice way to reload your Norn that maybe already used its equip gauge, so you can keep using it to restand whatever grade 3 that's in the front row or whatever Regalia unit it's boosting. So that's a really nice skill to keep your board flooded with gauges, because as we already explained, in the past, we need to rely on Norn and Yggdrasil, which were kind of counted as heavy. Now, with all these free gauge creation, we don't have to rely on the resource anymore, and for that fact, we can maybe play the grade 1 Artemis that allows us to snipe units a bit more frequently, because we have that extra countable as free. Also interesting enough, if we combine this with Norn that can restand it, you can create 4 gauges every single turn, and if we count in the gauge that we use with Norn for the restand, you have a positive of 3 gauges every single turn while attacking twice with your Vanguard if Norn is boosting your Vanguard, but that can only happen if you of course have an Yggdrasil on the field. So there are some really good synergistic plays you can do with Angelica, and it allows you to create a lot of gauges turn after turn after turn. And thanks to the grade 1 with the excess amount of soul charging, we can fulfill the supply for that demand. Now, of course, this isn't all, because Angelica has a third skill that's just a cherry on top of everything, because it's Auto Vanguard Circle. At the end of your opponent's turn, cost, discard 5 Divine Gauge and heal a card from your damage zone. So not only can she protect your field, buff your field, and equip everything on your field, but now she can use those equips to heal herself every single turn, if you can fulfill that demand. And as we've seen with the Grade 1, the Grade 2, and Norn, and Yggdrasil, and Angelica herself, it is possible to create 5 gauges every single turn, and probably even more than 5 gauges every single turn. And you protect your field, so it's harder for your opponent to remove those units while they have those equipped gauges onto the field. So in my eyes, this is actually a much better Sister Mirror deck from the Bermuda set that could heal itself, because this can possibly be active on your very first Grade 3 turn. So you write Angelica, you can immediately create the gauges that you need, and then your opponent, if they went second, they just start to write up to the Grade 3 turn, and after that turn's end, you probably can guard against it, you heal a card. And that will probably happen turn after turn after turn if you can get your resource engine going from the first Grade 3 turn onwards. And that is pretty powerful. And interesting enough, this is also possible as a tech card in Premium, because you'll get to sit on this unit at the end of your turn when you just try it out. So if you can still create your gauges, and as we discussed, the Grade 1 and the Grade 2 and Norn and Yggdrasil can create quite a lot of gauges in a single turn. So it's possible that this card can also be very useful in Premium. And at the same time, the continuous effect on the Vanguard Circle is also active during your opponent's turn, so you also have some field protection in that sense. So Angelica is a very powerful Regalia unit for the standard deck, together with Norn, Yggdrasil, the Artemis cards, as well as the new Regalia units in this set. But it will also have some premium applications, which makes this card a very interesting and versatile card for Genesis, and namely Regalia. So overall, Regalias, or mainly the Divine Gauge archetype or playstyle, looks to be a very interesting deck, and now finally has a solid foundation where it can be its standalone deck with a solid win condition. Before, with only Norn and Yggdrasil and the Artemis cards, it was kind of a mess. There was something there, but it wasn't good enough to be an inconsistent engine that you could say it's a dedicated own deck. Now with Angelica in the mix and the new Regalia cards, you can definitely make this a unique deck with its own win condition and its own playstyle, with some extra cards you can put into the mix, because as we explained, with the dedicated countercharger and the fact that we don't have to rely on Norn and Yggdrasil for the counterblast as heavy as we did in the past, we might be able to play some counterblast cards that could help the engine, or maybe to push for a game a bit faster. So overall, I'm very excited for these cards. They look pretty awesome, they look pretty unique, so I'm very curious how they're going to perform and how Bushiroad tends to build upon this idea with potential future support, as seen as Minerva is still nowhere to be found. So maybe in the next V Collection set. But with that said, that's everything that I wanted to discuss today. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new Regalia Divine Gauge cards. Are you excited by these cards? Do you think the playstyle is pretty interesting, or is this not really your cup of tea? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely Patreons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one!